So first, urbanization has traditionally been understood as an economic process that's driven by industrialization. And there's no doubt, and I don't think anybody would argue, that the growth of waged employment opportunities or industrialization isn't a spur for rural to urban migration. It certainly is. It's been shown to be that, and hence urbanization. However, industrialization is not a necessary condition for urbanization to occur. And we know this because of the widely observed and generally poorly explained phenomenon of urbanization without growth, as the World Bank has dubbed it, seen across sub-Saharan Africa from the mid to late 1970s straight through to the end of the 1990s. Economies in the region stagnated and in many cases contracted. There's a widespread misconception that urbanization is going really rapidly in Africa. It's not. It's just simply not happening. Urban populations are growing really, really fast, but the percentage of people living in urban areas is growing quite slowly. And this is a distinction between urban growth and urbanization, which is often not appreciated, but has significant implications for how we think about the challenges that we're facing. So here's the situation. Urban populations are growing really, really fast in absolute terms. They're growing slowly in relative terms. And all of this persisted through 2 decades of economic stagnation. So what's going on here? So first, a wealth of anthropological and sociological studies have shown that people migrate for a lot of reasons. Employment opportunities or prospective employment opportunities are just one of those reasons. People are pushed by rural poverty, by declining carrying capacity of the land that they inhabit due to climate change or overpopulation. Sometimes they're forced into urban settlements by conflict. There's always somebody who wants to move to the city for some reason, and so it's not very surprising, perhaps, that differential wage rates aren't the primary predictor. But as I noted above, urbanization, the change in the percentage of the population living in cities, has been progressing relatively slowly in Africa, which suggests that migration cannot account for the rapid growth of the region's urban population in absolute terms. Nobody debates the fact that Africa's urban population is growing really fast. It's just not growing fast in relative terms. So if it can't be migration, where are all these people coming from? The best data available suggests that the majority, over 50%, of new additions to African cities are born in African cities or towns. Cities are growing from within. Urban populations are growing fast because mortality rates have fallen considerably, both in urban and rural areas. But fertility remains high, and this creates a very high rate of natural increase. So in fact, I argue in this chapter that urbanization and urban growth, as distinct but related phenomena, are better understood primarily as demographic, not as economic phenomena. Wherever mortality rates come down, thanks to improvements in food security and disease control, primarily, urbanization and urban growth will happen regardless of the prevailing economic conditions. So why does this matter, correcting this sort of minor theoretical mistake? And the reason is because bad theory leads to bad policy. As I mentioned at the beginning, the apparent abnormality of urbanization without concomitant growth and structural transformation in economies, when viewed through this strictly economic lens, has resulted in an overemphasis on population mobility, that is, migration, rather than the demographic fundamentals of changes in fertility and mortality. And this has led to a peculiar outcome, which is the justification of expenditure on rural development as a means of slowing down or dealing with urban poverty and the perceived social ills that come with rapid urban population expansion. Improvements in income, health, and in particular education are major predictors of an individual's propensity to migrate. In other words, improving conditions in rural areas is very likely to have the effect of encouraging particularly young people, age 15 to 24, to take a shot at life in the city. The people that migrate are not the most vulnerable, they are not the poorest, they're the young, the healthy, the aspirational, with a bit of human capital. That's who moves to cities.
People who work on cities, there's a great tendency to go towards the noir, the dark, the black, to talk about urban dystopias. And when you combine that with Africa, which is often seen as the lost continent, the hopeless continent, according to The Economist, a continent ravaged by war. The potential to look at conflict and cities leads you to a place that could be really very dark. One of the things we wanted to do was break that apart to try and see what really happened to cities in different kinds of conflict. If you think about the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, Kinshasa was a haven of peace through what has been a long, protracted, ongoing war. And the reason for that is that power holders in Kinshasa have managed to hold on to power in the city, maintain that haven of peace. At the other side of this vast country, in Goma, you also have a city that has been a center of peace for very different reasons, because it's at the center of a war economy. So it's in the interests of people engaged in warfare or in conflict to keep Goma going, because the entire war economy is based on that city functioning. Anyone who's seen Black Hawk Down will know what a huge impact on the American psyche the failure to bring Mogadishu down had for the Americans. And this has had implications for other conflicts and their link to cities. So not long after '93, you had the major genocide in Rwanda, and very little international intervention because of having had such severe fingers burnt in Somalia. That for cities not to feed future civil wars, not to feed civic conflict that turns violent and unhelpful, you need to address the problems that we all grapple with all the time in our work as urbanists: urban governance, municipal management, delivery of services, the addressing of urban poverty.
I'm interested in the idea of local democracy in the city conflicts. If there's any interesting examples that you've come across where a vibrant local democracy has actually hindered or helped the conflict situation, or anything along those lines.
A political coalition and settlement between some quite unsavory people with quite unsavory pasts who'd been involved in the Civil War in KwaZulu-Natal, people who were involved in traditional authorities or who were chiefs, who came from a system that didn't admit women, that wasn't democratic, and so on. But the democratic outcome was a result of finding a developmental coalition they could all buy into.
We haven't talked a lot about the youth bulge, which is another hot topic within urbanization and demography. And earlier you had kind of mentioned the wrong approach which had been taken in the past in putting programs for youth in rural areas. And I was wondering if you had any policy suggestions based on that for youth, and especially considering conflict and what we've been talking about earlier.
I'll just say this about the youth bulge. One is that Sub-Saharan Africa's dependency ratio is falling. That means that there are more young people of working age entering the workforce. This is a massive opportunity. This accounts for approximately maybe 50% of East Asia's economic growth, was a massive injection of investment with a lot of young people coming into cities. And that's a great mix for increasing productivity and promoting economic development. However, there's a flip side, and so often, unfortunately, in Africa, it's seen as, oh my God, there's a youth bulge. The youth are the most likely to riot, they're the most likely to commit crimes, particularly young men. Therefore, we have a big problem. Now, there isn't really a lot of robust evidence to suggest that youth bulges are a problem unless youth don't have opportunity. And that's really the crux of the issue. Having educated youth or having ambitious youth that don't have some kind of outlet for their energies and their creativities can be highly dangerous and destructive.